Welcome to California in Focus. I'm your host, Keegan Kernodle, and joining me today is the Center Square's California reporter, Kenneth Shrupp. Today, we're talking about some data you found that California lost jobs in 2024 and that there were no jobs created. Kenneth, can you explain this and dig into it a little bit for us?
Hey, Keegan. So I saw a new report from the state-funded Legislative Analyst Office about data from the fourth quarter of 2024, finding that there was no job creation. They used this federal data set that I then went into and found that the state had actually not gained any jobs in 2024. In fact, it only lost jobs. The state lost 80,300 jobs between January and December of 2024. This report was pretty damning, though. It also found that the monthly jobs reports have overestimated jobs growth by about 25,000 jobs per month. This means that, as we've known all along, these monthly snapshot job surveys, they might be good at a very macro level to just estimate general employment levels, but they are not very sensitive at the edges.
You reported that Newsom has said California is the fourth largest economy and the jobs are going great there.
Yes, that does not seem to be the case. And it's really not apparent that California is the world's fourth largest economy because that uses the economy size in dollars. The difference is, though, the world economy is not priced in dollars. The world's economies are priced in the local currency. So if you're going to compare the economies of different places, you need to see how much stuff and services you can buy in that local currency based on the productivity of that country. This is called purchasing power parity and is actually a more accurate measure of the relative size performance of economies. Once you do that, California is only barely ahead of economic heavyweights Italy and Turkey and well behind the United Kingdom. So California is ranked 11th once you actually account for the extremely high cost in California and the relative strength of the dollar compared to other currencies.
And now, as far as the job creation goes, I know there's been touts in California of creating lots of jobs as well, right? Despite what this is showing. Right.
So we have recent reports showing that there were a lot of there have been some continued private sector job losses. We've lost, I believe, about 200,000 private sector jobs since early 2023. Most of that has been more than offset by gains in government and taxpayer funded jobs. But the reality is that in some months, the plurality of these jobs are from a welfare program called in-home supportive services, where if you are elderly or disabled and you're enrolled in Medi-Cal, which 40% of Californians are, you have to be very low income to qualify for Medi-Cal. So that just shows you 40% of Californians are so poor that they are eligible and enrolled in Medi-Cal, that you can pay a household member minimum wage to provide care for you. You can even get overtime hours for this. So we now have 742,300 Californians who are getting paid as IHSS providers. They work an average of 31 hours a week, which is about $505 a week on average, or $26,300 per year. And it's not clear what services are being provided for 31 hours a week of employment. You know, when you're caring for a family member, it can be really time consuming, and it is something that can make it harder for you to have a job. So I understand why this program would exist, but there are nearly 1 million people who are now working in this program, and it's accounted for significant amounts of the quote jobs that have been added to the state. And that doesn't really suggest strength as a basis of the state's economy.
So up to how many hours, service hours can be provided per month? And, who's funding this?
So IHSS recipients can get up to 283 hours of assistance per month. That's over 70 hours a week. That could be substantial income. That's paid for by the taxpayer, but these program costs are shared with federal taxpayers as well. So, I believe there's a 50% reimbursement rate from federal taxpayers. There are certain individuals who have reimbursement rates of up to 90%, but it's somewhere between 50 and 90% based on the recipient, and state and county governments are left with the rest of the tab. There was another LAO report on the IHSS program in California, and they said, this is quite concerning. Quote, caseloads are growing at an increasing rate. So, the state expects a quarter of Californians to be 60 or older by 2030. We're having a demographic, inversion happening in the state where, the average age is rapidly increasing, and the number of people who are retired or on government services is also rapidly growing. So when you have a growing number of dependents to workers, at a certain point, you can't afford to maintain these benefits.
Well, thank you, Kenneth, for getting into this with us. Readers can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com. And this has been another episode of California in Focus.